By the time the police finally opened my neighbor's door, my face was already on his walls. Every inch of that apartment was covered in me. Photos of me sleeping, me brushing my teeth, me getting dressed. And in the middle of the living room, on a huge computer monitor, was a live camera feed of my own bedroom, from an angle I still haven't found. The worst part? I lived right next to him for 11 months, and the whole time everyone told me I was overreacting. Welcome back to Midwest Mysteries. The story you're about to hear is an allegedly true neighbor horror story from right here in the American Midwest. Names and a few details have been changed at the request of the person who sent this in, but the core of what happened is exactly how they described it. If you live in an apartment, a duplex, or even a suburban neighborhood, this one is going to hit uncomfortably close to home. Turn off the lights if you dare, make sure your doors are locked, and settle in. This is The Man in 2D. My name is Aaron, and 2 years ago I moved into what I thought was the best deal I'd ever find in my city. I live in a mid-sized town in the Midwest. Not tiny, not huge. There's crime, but it's the kind you mostly read about. It doesn't usually knock on your apartment wall in the middle of the night. At the time, I was 27, working long shifts as a respiratory therapist at a hospital. I'd just gotten out of a pretty bad relationship, moved out of the place I shared with my ex, and I needed somewhere cheap, fast, and not totally falling apart. That's how I ended up in Unit 2C of Maple Ridge Apartments. Maple Ridge was one of those older brick complexes just off a main road, the kind you barely notice when you drive past. 2 floors, long exterior walkways, a cracked parking lot, and a patch of dead grass that was optimistically called a courtyard. But the unit was clean enough, the rent was low, and pets were allowed. I had a 3-year-old rescue mutt named Daisy who came with me everywhere. The place had this layout. On my floor were 2A, 2B, 2C, my unit, and 2D at the very end. My unit, 2C, shared a long bedroom wall with 2D. The leasing agent, a woman in her 50s named Marlene, walked me through the place on a rainy afternoon in March. The apartment smelled faintly like old carpet and someone else's cooking, but it felt survivable. For the price, it felt like I was getting away with something. As we stood in the bedroom, Daisy sniffing around the corners, I heard a faint thud from the other side of the wall. It was like someone dropping a book or a shoe. I jumped a little and glanced at Marlene. She smiled. "That'll be your neighbor. Guy in 2D. Been here longer than I have. Quiet, keeps to himself. You'll hardly even know he's there." She said it like that was a good thing. I signed the lease a week later. The first time I saw my neighbor, he was already watching me. It was move-in day. My brother had just helped me unload the last of the boxes, and he'd left to grab food. Daisy was tied to the stair railing with her leash while I carried things up. I stepped out onto the exterior walkway, juggling a box, and nearly bumped into him. He was standing just outside the door of 2D, leaning on the railing, smoking. He had one of those faces that are hard to place age-wise. Maybe late 30s, maybe mid-40s. Brown hair buzz, short, pale eyes, average height, average build. The kind of guy you wouldn't remember from a crowd. But I remember how he smiled. It was slow, like it took him a second to remember he was supposed to. "Hey," he said, "you must be the new one in C." I shifted the box. "Yeah, Aaron, nice to meet you." He flicked his cigarette over the railing and stuck out his hand. His palm felt dry and too warm. "Mark," he said, "I'm in D. If you need anything, tools, help with anything, just knock. I'm usually around." Daisy barked from the stairs when she saw him. Her tail wasn't wagging. The hair on her back lifted a little. Mark looked down at her. "She's cute," he said. "What's her name?" "Daisy," I said. "She's friendly, usually." He chuckled, but something about his eyes didn't change with the sound. "Animals know things," Pia said. "Sometimes they don't like who we pick to live next to." It was a weird comment. I laughed it off. Guess I'll have to win her over. He watched me a second too long as I passed him with the box. "Yeah," he said softly. "Guess you will." The first few weeks were mostly normal. I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, came home exhausted, walked Daisy, microwaved food, fell into bed. I'd hear muffled TV sounds coming through the wall from 2D sometimes, or footsteps moving along that shared wall, but nothing unusual for apartment living. Mark made a point of being helpful. The second week I came home to find a note slid under my door. Hey, 2C, your left brake light's out. Mark, 2D. I hadn't noticed. When I thanked him the next day, he shrugged and said he just didn't want me to get pulled over. Little things like that kept happening. One night around 10 p.m., there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Mark was standing there holding a package. This came to my door by mistake, he said. Figured you'd want it. The shipping label clearly said 2C, not 2D. I chalked it up to the delivery person and took it. Thanks. He glanced past me into the apartment, eyes lingering on the hallway leading to my bedroom. You living alone? He asked, like it was casual. Just me and Daisy. He nodded slowly. Brave. I don't like being in big empty spaces by myself. Can't sleep without the TV on. I shifted, feeling a bit cornered. Daisy growled softly from the couch, barely audible. Well, I'm pretty tired, so I'm gonna... Sure, he cut in. Hey, what days do you work? I've noticed you're gone a lot. That question landed wrong. Different days, I said. Hospital schedule. Changes all the time. He studied my face like he was memorizing it, then smiled again. Right, yeah. Well, night, Aaron. He walked back down to 2D. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and told myself it was just an awkward neighbor thing. Some people don't know boundaries. No big deal. Except the thing about my brake light, I hadn't parked anywhere near his unit that day. From his angle, he shouldn't have been able to see the back of my car at all. I remember standing at my window later, looking down at the lot, tracing the line of sight angles. There was no way he'd just noticed it from his door. He'd either walked right up behind my car to look, or he was spending a lot more time outside than I realized. The first time I woke up at 3:07 a.m., to the sound of my TV turning on by itself, I thought I must have rolled over on the remote. I sleep with the bedroom door cracked, so the blue glow from the living room spilled down the hall. Daisy's head lifted from where she slept at the foot of my bed, ears pricked. She let out a low woof. Relax, I mumbled, feeling around for the remote in the sheets. It wasn't there. When I went into the living room, the TV was on the home screen. The remote was sitting neatly on the coffee table. I turned it off, checked the front door, locked, and went back to bed, more annoyed than scared. It happened again 3 nights later. Different time, 2:41 a.m. Same blue glow, same empty coffee table. The third time I unplugged the TV from the wall before I went to sleep. At 3:13 a.m., I woke up to Daisy barking furiously toward the wall shared with 2D. I snapped upright, heart racing. The room was dark, but Daisy's silhouette stood rigid, facing that wall, teeth bared. Daisy, stop, I whispered. Then I heard it. Then 3 slow knocks. Not on my door, on the wall, right at the head of my bed, from the other side. Knock, knock, knock. It was so deliberate, it felt personal. Daisy went nuts, barking like someone was in our bedroom. I slammed my fist against the wall. Hey, it's 3 a.m, cut it out. Silence. I lay there, adrenaline boiling, waiting for a response. None came. Eventually, Daisy settled, though she kept her body between me and that wall the rest of the night. The next afternoon, on my way out to work, I knocked on Mark's door. He opened almost immediately, like he'd been standing close by. Hey, I said, sorry to bug you, but were you, banging on the wall last night? Around 3? He tilted his head. What wall? The one we share. My bedroom's right against yours. There were these loud knocks. He shook his head, smiling faintly. I don't sleep well. I'd remember that. Probably the pipes, or the building settling. This place is ancient. His answer was so casual that I felt almost childish for asking. Yeah, maybe, I said. It just sounded really intentional. He kept his hand on the doorframe, blocking most of my view. You know, motion can sound like anything through drywall, he said. I hear you walking around sometimes, and I think someone's in here with me. The way he said that made my skin crawl. I forced a polite laugh and stepped back. Okay, guess it's just the building. Sorry again. Don't be sorry. His eyes flicked over my hair, my shoulders, my keys in my hand. Better to be cautious, especially living alone. He let that hang in the air a second too long before closing the door. The knocking on the wall became a pattern. Always 3 knocks, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Never any sound before or after, just those 3 slow taps from the other side of my headboard. Some nights it wouldn't happen. Others, it would wake me so suddenly my heart would slam against my ribs like it wanted out. I moved my bed to the opposite wall. It helped a little, psychologically, but I could still hear it. Daisy took to sleeping with her head pointed at that side of the room, ears twitching. Around the same time, other things started to happen. I'd come home from work and find the bathroom light on when I was sure I'd turned it off. Daisy's food bowl would be moved a few inches from where I left it. A pair of jeans I draped over a chair would be folded and laid on my bed. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you can just tell someone's been there? The air is disturbed. That's the only way I can describe it. I told myself I was tired, forgetful, stressed from work. Then one day I came home and found my bedroom window cracked open 2 inches. It was early May. We'd had a cold snap, and I was obsessive about keeping the window sealed because my heating bill had been insane. I stood there staring at that little gap, my brain trying to come up with any benign explanation. Maybe I'd opened it and forgotten. Maybe the latch was faulty. Daisy patted in, sniffed the window, then whimpered and backed away. I shut it. This time I slid the lock and pushed hard until I heard the metal click. That night I shoved a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door. I still woke up at 2:56 a.m. to 3 slow knocks from the wall. My stomach dropped. This time the knocks were slightly lower down, like whoever did it knew I'd moved the bed. I told my friends bits and pieces of what was happening, but when you say it out loud, it never sounds as scary as it feels. My neighbor's kind of weird, and maybe knocking on my wall at night sounds like a minor annoyance, not a threat. I didn't mention the folded jeans, the open window, how I'd started leaving a dining chair under the front doorknob at night, just in case the deadbolt somehow failed. My best friend Kelsey said, "You're alone for the first time in years, in a place with thin walls. You're hyper-aware of every sound. It's normal." Then she added, half joking, "But keep a knife by your bed just in case." At work, I was short-tempered and distracted. One of my coworkers, Anna, asked if I was sleeping okay. "Neighbor issues," I said. "Thin walls and a lot of late-night noise." Anna frowned. "What complex?" "Maple Ridge." Her expression shifted. Just a flicker, but I caught it. "Off Lincoln?" "Brick. 2 stories. Kind of run down?" "Yeah, why?" She paused. "Nothing. My cousin lived there for like 3 months. Said it was weird." "Weird how?" "She said someone kept messing with her door. She'd lock it and come back and it'd be unlocked. Stuff in her apartment would be moved. She thought the landlord was letting maintenance in without telling her. She moved out pretty fast." "Which unit was she in?" I asked. "I don't know. I can text her." Later that day she did. 2B, she told me. My stomach turned to ice. 2B was the unit right next to mine on the other side. So her neighbors would have been me and 2A and 2C, Anna said. "Why not?" I thought of Mark in 2D, just beyond my bedroom. How he somehow knew my brake light was out. How he always seemed to open his door right as I passed. How he asked what days I worked. I didn't have proof, just an accumulation of things that made me feel watched. But that feeling does something to you. I started showering with the bathroom door locked, even though I was alone. I stopped walking around in shorts and a tank top, even when it was hot. I got dressed in the closet. One night I thought, if someone was watching me, from where would they see me? The answer came immediately. The vents, the shared wall, the bathroom mirror. And for the first time, I thought about what might be on the other side of those walls. I bought a cheap little USB camera online, the kind that looks like a phone charger. I plugged it into an outlet facing my front door, just to see if I was losing my mind. For 3 days, nothing happened except me and Daisy coming and going. On the 4th day, I worked a double. I left in the dark and came back in the dark, exhausted. I forgot to check the camera until my next day off. I plugged it into my laptop and hit play on the last recording. The first few hours were boring. Me leaving, Daisy pacing, napping, staring at the door. Sometime around 1 p.m., she became alert, ears up, staring at the door like someone was right outside. Then very softly, almost too low to hear through the tinny laptop speakers, I heard it, the faint sound of metal in the lock. My heart rate doubled. The deadbolt didn't turn. I never heard the door open. But the knob jiggled. Just once, firmly, like someone testing it. Daisy snarled, a sound I'd never heard from her before. She lunged at the door, barking like a maniac. Whoever was out there didn't knock, didn't call out, just silence. Then after a long moment, the sound of footsteps receding down the exterior walkway. I jumped ahead in the footage. Nothing else the rest of the day. I stared at the paused frame of my door, the cheap wood, the deadbolt. Someone had tried it in broad daylight, knowing I was gone. I called the apartment office and told Marlene. "There's no sign of forced entry," she said. "If your deadbolt's working, you're fine. Probably just a delivery person at the wrong door." "Delivery people knock," I said. "They don't test the lock quietly without leaving a package." There was a pause. "I can have maintenance look at your lock," she offered. "Beyond that, there's not much I can do. If you feel unsafe, you can call the police. But without a break-in, they pretty much just take a report." I hung up feeling stupid and alone. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled my bed fully away from the shared wall with 2D. Then I got a flashlight, knelt next to the outlet, and started really looking at the baseboard. It took me a minute to see it. Behind my nightstand, just above the baseboard, there was a tiny hole in the drywall, smaller than the tip of my pinky finger. I would never have noticed it if I hadn't been looking for something wrong. I brought the flashlight closer. The hole wasn't random. The edges were too smooth, too deliberate, like it had been drilled. Every hair on my body stood up. I moved my nightstand. Behind it, there were two more of those tiny round holes at different heights along the wall. I pressed my ear to one. At first, there was only the muffled hum of the building. Then I heard what sounded like a TV show playing on low volume, a male voice laughing. 2D. The realization hit me so hard I had to sit down. Someone had drilled through our shared wall. On my side, the holes were barely noticeable, hidden behind furniture and outlets. On his side, I had no idea what they looked like, maybe bigger, maybe with a camera lens fitted through. I grabbed some toothpaste and filled the holes, hands shaking. It was a stupid temporary solution, but I had this desperate need to block them, to put something between me and whatever was on the other side. Daisy paced nervously while I worked, nails clicking on the wood floor. When I finished, I sat back on my heels, breathing hard, feeling a strange mix of triumph and terror. That night, the knocking came again. This time, it was louder. Knock, 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 and then, for the first time, a voice, muffled through the wall but close. "Can you hear me, Aaron?" Daisy exploded into barking. I froze. The voice sounded exactly like Mark's. I forced myself to stand and slammed my palm against the drywall. "Leave me alone," I shouted, "or I'm calling the cops." Silence for a long, stretching 10 seconds. Then faintly, like he was smiling, "Just making sure you're safe." I didn't sleep at all after that. The police came the next morning after I called their non-emergency line and explained as calmly as I could that my neighbor was knocking on my bedroom wall in the middle of the night, saying my name, and that I'd found drilled holes between our units. To their credit, 2 officers actually showed up. They examined the wall. The toothpaste I'd used to plug the holes was still soft. "Could be from an old cable line or something," one of them said. "You sure your neighbor meant anything by the knocking? People mess around in apartments all the time." "He said my name," I interrupted, "through the wall, at 3 a.m. I've never given him my number. I barely talk to him. And he knows my name." The other officer glanced at his partner. "Well, your name is probably on the mailbox, right?" It was. I hated that he had a point. They went next door and knocked on 2D. I stood in my kitchen, heart pounding, listening through the thin walls. Mark answered. His voice was polite, confused. No, he hadn't been knocking on my walls. No, he hadn't drilled any holes. He'd been there for years, and they were always there. Yes, he'd be happy to refrain from any loud noises at night. Yes, of course he wanted his neighbor to feel safe. The officers came back, gave me a sympathetic look, and left after taking a half-hearted report. I watched their cruiser pull out of the lot from my front window. Then I watched Mark's door. He stepped out slowly, leaning casually on the railing, and looked right at my window. For a solid 5 seconds, we just stared at each other. Then he lifted his hand and did that slow, deliberate knock gesture in the air. 3 times. I dropped the curtain so fast the rod rattled. That night, I didn't stay there. I packed a bag, grabbed Daisy, and drove to Kelsey's place. Once I was in the safety of her guest room, adrenaline started to give way to anger. If Mark was coming into my apartment while I was gone, if he drilled those holes, if he was the one testing my lock, I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Something the police couldn't brush off. Over takeout Chinese at Kelsey's kitchen table, I laid out my plan. "I'm going to set a trap," I said. "What kind of trap?" she asked warily. "I'm going to make him think I'm gone for the weekend. Park my car a couple streets over so he doesn't see it. Turn off all the lights like I'm leaving. Then I'm going to fill the apartment with hidden cameras and see what happens." Kelsey stared at me. "Aaron, that's dangerous." "I won't be there," I said. "You'll be with me, remember? We'll be watching from your place. If he comes in, we call the cops with live video." She rubbed her face. "What if he doesn't come in?" "Then I'm paranoid," I said, "and I still move out as soon as I can. But if he does, we'll know." After a long pause, Kelsey nodded. "Okay, I'm in, but we're doing this smart." Over the next 2 days, we bought 4 more small cameras, one disguised as a smoke detector, one as a USB charger, one as a digital clock, and one tiny one that we could tape inside an air vent. We positioned them carefully around my apartment, one facing the front door, one in the living room pointed toward the hallway, one in the bedroom covering the wall shared with 2D in the closet, one in the hallway near the bathroom, and the vent camera pointed outward from the duct above the shower. We tested each one from Kelsey's laptop to make sure the live feed worked. On Friday afternoon, I made a point of cheerfully saying loud enough in my apartment, "Road trip weekend, Daisy, you ready?" and letting the front door slam a little harder than usual when I left. I moved my car to a side street where it couldn't be seen from the building. Then Kelsey picked me up, and we drove 30 minutes away to her sister's place, where we could watch the feeds without risk of being nearby. By 9 p.m., the whole building was dark on camera, except for the amber glow bleeding under my door from the hallway light. We watched the door cam obsessively. 9:30 p.m. Nothing. 10:15 p.m. A neighbor from 2B walked past. 11:02 p.m. A shadow paused outside my door. The knob didn't turn. Then the shadow moved on. Midnight came and went. My eyelids grew heavy. Kelsey dozed off on the couch beside me. I was starting to think maybe I'd finally scared him enough with the police visit that he'd back off. At 2:11 a.m., the motion alert pinged on the laptop. Kelsey jerked awake. We both leaned in. On the screen from the front door camera, I saw it. The doorknob turning. Slowly, deliberately. The deadbolt turned next. I distinctly remembered locking it before we left. The door swung inward, and Mark stepped into my apartment like he owned it. I felt physically sick. He was wearing dark clothes, no jacket despite the chill, gloves on his hands. He closed the door softly behind him, locked it again from the inside, and stood for a moment just breathing. Then he smiled. Not the tight, neighborly smile he'd given me in the hallway. This one was loose, private, unrestrained. He walked further into the living room. From the second camera, we watched him run his fingers slowly along the back of my couch, then pick up the throw pillow and press it to his face, inhaling deeply. I think I made a sound because Kelsey grabbed my hand. On the hallway camera, he moved toward my bedroom. In the bedroom feed, he stood in the doorway and looked around, head tilting as if admiring his work. He walked to where my bed usually sat against the shared wall and ran his palm lightly along the drywall, checking the spots where I plugged the holes. He chuckled silently and shook his head. Then he turned to my closet, opened it, and stepped inside. For a full minute, he was off camera. My heart hammered in my throat. When he came back into view, he was holding something. It was a small black tool roll. He unrolled it on my bed, and I saw a drill. Different sized bits, tiny circular saws, a small, flexible snake camera. He ran the snake camera along the baseboard, tracing the wall like he was mapping it in his head. "This is insane," Kelsey whispered. "We have to call 911. "Not yet," I said, my voice shaking. "We need him on video doing something obviously criminal. Inside is already bad, but if we can catch him at the wall..." As if on cue, he chose a fresh spot higher up on the wall, closer to where my head would be if the bed were still there. He fitted a bit into the drill and pressed it to the drywall. We watched, horrified, as he carefully drilled another tiny, perfect hole straight through the wall that separated my bedroom from his. White dust scattered on my floor. He brushed it into his hand with practiced ease, like he'd done this many times, and slipped it into his pocket so there'd be no trace. Then he brought the snake camera up and fed its tip into the hole, eyes flicking to a small handheld monitor he took from his bag. "Perfect," he said softly, lips forming the word, though the camera had no audio. His whole body radiated satisfaction. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up. I kept my voice low and as steady as I could. "My neighbor broke into my apartment," I said. "He's there right now. I'm watching him on a hidden camera. He has a drill and he's drilling holes into my bedroom wall." The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. She asked for the address, my name, if there were any weapons visible. I told her what I knew, that I was not physically there, that he might think I was out of town. "We have units on the way," she said. "Stay on the line." On screen, Mark moved into the bathroom. The vent camera showed him standing in my shower looking up. He reached up to the vent cover above the shower and unscrewed it with a small screwdriver from his kit. He tilted it, peered inside, then smiled that same private smile. He pulled something from his pocket, a small black square with a lens, a camera smaller than the ones I'd bought. He taped it inside the vent, angled it down toward the shower. He'd done this before. The movements were too smooth, too confident. He'd had a camera in my bathroom, maybe more than one. He'd seen everything. The dispatcher's voice buzzed faintly in my ear. "Ma'am, officers are on scene. They're approaching the unit. Do you want to stay on the line?" "Yes," I whispered. "Please." We watched in real time as Mark wandered back into the living room. He sat on my couch like it was his. He picked up the throw blanket I kept there, wrapped it around his shoulders, and leaned back, staring at the blank TV. Lights from the exterior hallway suddenly brightened on the front door camera. Two shadows approached. There was a sharp knock at my door. "Police!" Mark didn't move for half a second, like he was processing what was happening. Then he shot to his feet, the blanket falling away. He looked toward the door, toward the bedroom, like he was trying to calculate if he could hide in time. The knock came again, louder. "Police, open the door!" He strode to the door, unlocking it with feigned confusion plastered on his face. We could only see the edge of his body in the doorframe, but we saw the officers step in on the feed, their shapes filling the frame. Within moments, his expression changed from confusion to something else, panic, then anger. One officer moved further into the apartment, looking around while the other stayed closer to the door, talking to him. On my phone, the dispatcher said, "They've made contact. They're detaining him." A minute later, I watched as they handcuffed Mark right in my living room and let him out. He kept his head down, but at one point, just before he disappeared from view of the front door camera, he looked straight up at the lens, straight at us. His eyes were flat and cold. My skin crawled. The video was more than enough for the police to get a warrant for 2D. What they found inside was worse than anything I'd imagined. I wasn't allowed in during the initial search, but the detective assigned to my case, a woman named Morales, sat me down at the station a few days later and told me as much as she could. Mark's apartment looked almost empty at first glance. A mattress on the floor, a small table with a single chair, no couch, no decorations, nothing personal, just bare walls and cheap blinds. But one of those walls wasn't real. The wall opposite our shared bedroom wall, Morales said, was actually a false partition. Behind it, in what should have been part of his living room, he had built a narrow, hidden room. In that secret space, he'd mounted monitors, 8 of them, on the wall. Each monitor was connected to a feed from tiny cameras he'd hidden in different parts of the building. Not just my unit. 2B, 2A, the laundry room, the mail area, and my apartment had the most feeds. Bedroom, living room, hallway, bathroom, from the vent above the shower. Even one aimed from somewhere I still can't figure out, high up in a corner, giving a wide shot of my entire place. He'd been watching all of us. Recording. They found a stack of external hard drives, neatly labeled with dates. Years worth of footage, cataloged. And not just Maple Ridge. Some labels referenced other addresses. Places he'd lived before, probably. Morales said they also found a notebook. In it, he'd kept detailed logs. What time I left for work, what time I got home, who came over, what I wore when I showered. He'd even written down things like 2C cried tonight for 22 minutes, unknown reason. 2C moved bed, adjust hole height accordingly. My stomach turned. He's being charged with multiple counts of burglary, illegal surveillance, stalking, and more, Morales said. We're still sorting it out. There may be federal charges, depending on what he did with the footage. I stared at the table between us. There was a camera in my bathroom. I said, he recorded me naked without my knowledge. For how long? Her face softened. We don't know yet. I'm not going to lie to you. It looks like he's been at this for a long time. We'll be in touch once we know more, and you'll have a chance to decide how much you want to be involved in prosecuting. But you're safe now. He's not getting out anytime soon. Has he done worse to anyone? I asked. She paused. We don't have evidence of physical assaults at this time, but emotionally, psychologically, financially, this is pretty bad. Pretty bad doesn't cover what it feels like to know that the place you thought was your safest space was actually a stage set for someone else's private show. I moved out of Maple Ridge as soon as my parents could help me find another place. I took a leave of absence from work. For weeks, I couldn't be alone in any room without wondering who might be watching. Every vent looked like an eye. Every neighbor sounded like a threat. And I couldn't stop thinking about the holes in the wall. If I hadn't found them, if I hadn't set that trap, how much further would he have gone? I keep circling back to one thing Morales mentioned almost offhand, like it was just another detail in a sea of horrors. She said when they first walked into the secret room, all the monitors were off, except one. On that one, they saw the live view from the new hole he'd drilled into my bedroom wall that night. He'd labeled that feed 2C close. Right above it, on a post-it, he'd written, "Move in September?" He had a plan for me, for my life, for my space, and I had never known. Mark took a plea deal. Last I heard, he's serving time. It wasn't as long as I wanted, it never is. But I try not to dwell on that part, because the thought of him ever walking around free again makes my skin crawl. The footage he collected is in evidence. Some of it may be destroyed after the case is fully processed. Some of it might sit on a shelf in a room somewhere for years. I've been told my name is redacted in all documents, that if any of it ever ends up in court, it'll be under a pseudonym. None of that changes the fact that he's seen more of me than anyone should without my consent. 6 months after I moved to a new complex across town, top floor, corner unit, no shared bedroom walls, I was wasting time online and saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a screenshot posted in a thread about creepy apartment stories. The commenter said they'd found it on a surveillance fetish site that had since been taken down. The image was grainy, low res, but I recognized the layout instantly. My old kitchen at Maple Ridge, the exact angle of my sink, my old dish rack. And there, blurred but unmistakable, was my back. My hair tied up, I was washing dishes, wearing a tank top and shorts, completely unaware. The caption under the screenshot said, "Girl in 2C, she has no idea." The timestamp was from 3 months before I found the holes in the wall. I slammed my laptop shut and sat there shaking. It didn't matter that the site was gone now. It didn't matter that he was in prison. For months, maybe years, there were strangers online who knew me not as Aaron, but as Girl in 2C. They watched me eat, sleep, shower. They rated me, commented on me, bought access to my privacy. And every time I think about moving again, every time I hear my new neighbors through the walls, every time a random video ad uses hidden camera footage as a gimmick, I feel that same cold weight settle in my chest. Mark never touched me. That's what people tell me, like it's supposed to be comforting. But he lived inches away from my head, night after night, with nothing more than some drywall and a coat of paint between us. He built an entire secret life centered around watching me and my neighbors. He knew exactly when I was most vulnerable. He memorized my routines, he planned carefully, silently. And the whole time, everyone told me I was just being paranoid about a weird neighbor. So if you live in an apartment, if you share walls with someone you barely know, listen to your dog, check your vents, look closely at your walls, and if your neighbor ever knocks 3 times from the other side at 3 in the morning, whispering your name like a secret. Call someone, even if they tell you you're overreacting. Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and a nightmare is the decision to believe that feeling in your gut. And sometimes the scariest monsters don't need to break in. They're already living right next door. That was The Man in 2D, an allegedly true neighbor horror story from here in the Midwest. What would you have done in Aaron's place? Would you have noticed the holes in the wall? Would you still be able to live in an apartment after something like that? Let me know in the comments. If you've ever had a terrifying neighbor or any strange experience you can't quite explain, whether it's in an apartment, out on a lonely highway, or deep in the woods, and you'd like to share it on the channel, check the description for how to submit your story. If you made it this far, don't forget to like the video so more people can find it, and subscribe to Midwest Mysteries for more scary true stories every week. Make sure you tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, lock your doors, check your walls, and remember, sometimes the biggest mysteries are hiding right next door.